Okay, welcome to the live stream. My name is Trajan. I am a CFO, former Wall Street analyst, and I've got a couple of degrees in finance, and I write a daily newsletter called The Morning Download. You can get it at morningdownload.com. And in today's issue, I talked about Nvidia and Intel, and I thought it would be interesting to do a video kind of elaborating on some of the things I talked about in the newsletter. The premise being that recently in the news, we've heard that Nvidia recently was approaching and just barely passed over the $1 trillion market cap threshold, which makes it currently the sixth largest company in the world. Just a couple of years ago, it was worth $450 billion, and it has come out of the blue. In the past week, the stock is up 35%. It has just exploded. So Nvidia is at $1 billion. We're going to talk about what may or may not make it worth $1 billion. I'm going to use my background as a CFO and a former Wall Street analyst, and do some analysis on Nvidia, and in particular comparing it to Intel. Intel has been around forever. It was one of the early pioneers in chips in Silicon Valley after Fairchild Semiconductor in Silicon Valley. It's one of the pioneers. People left there and founded Intel. It was run by Andy Grove for many years. Intel actually was a client of mine when I was a tech analyst, a tech consultant in Silicon Valley. They were a client of mine. Very good, very well-run company. You may recognize them by the Intel Inside or the little jingle that Intel has. But Intel, their market cap is only $125 billion. So you can see here on the screen, this is part of the newsletter from this morning, and it compares the two different companies. I want to go through this and run down why they are valued so differently, keeping into consideration that one of them is much more profitable and makes much more money than the other. And I'll give you a hint. It is not Nvidia. Nvidia is the less profitable of the two between Intel and Nvidia. Intel and Nvidia, a couple of other companies are the major companies in the chip space. There's Nvidia, there's Intel, there's AMD, Advanced Micro Devices, which also used to be a client of mine. And then there's Marvel Technologies, which I had not heard of until this week, actually. They also shot up 35%, just like Nvidia did, although they're smaller. So let's compare, just do a quick rundown of the two different companies. Nvidia, you can see on the screen here, has a market cap of just below $1 trillion. And we'll dig into that in just a second. Intel, however, let me make that a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Intel has a market cap of $125 billion, much smaller. Let me make that bigger. There you go. Okay. So Intel's revenues are higher at $56 billion versus $25 billion for Nvidia. So Intel has twice the revenue, almost twice the revenue as Nvidia. And Intel's EBITDA, their profit or the cash flow, is also higher at almost $10 billion, $9.85 billion versus $6 billion for Nvidia. So given that Intel has higher EBITDA and more revenue, twice as much revenue, why is Nvidia worth 8 times more? Why is Nvidia worth $1 trillion? And Intel, which has been around for decades, is only worth $125 billion. But before we do that, let's get some background on Nvidia a little bit. So Nvidia has been around since 1993. It was dreamed up by 3 people: Jensen Huang, who's the CEO, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Prim. They dreamed it up. They planned Nvidia in the back of a Denny's. Huang used to work in Denny's long ago in his teenage years. He was very familiar with it. And they came up with that idea of creating Nvidia in the back of a Denny's. The other 2 worked at Sun Microsystems at the time. which was a client of mine for a while. I don't want to keep name dropping, but I know the space because I worked in Silicon Valley. So they moved their offices into they moved their meetings into Priam's townhouse, and it didn't even have AC. This is the typical story of the company that starts in somebody's garage and turns into something extremely valuable. And that's exactly what okay, everybody, thank you for joining the live stream. Let me just make sure that this is up and running. Push all the buttons, and then what we're doing. My name is Trajan. I run this channel, the Invincible Money channel. I am a former Wall Street analyst. I used to work in Silicon Valley, which I'll talk about a little bit, and I've been a CFO for a long time. And I have worked with these companies that we're going to talk about in the live stream today, both Nvidia and Intel. So let me just see here how I can share my screen. It looks like it's not going to let me do that. So let's just jump into it. So the topic of this video is whether or not Nvidia is worth $1 billion. So Nvidia was dreamed up by three people: Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Chris Priam in 1993 in the back of a Denny's. That was where they met often. And the other two, besides Jensen, worked at Sun Microsystems at the time. They came up with the idea of starting a microchip company focused on GPUs. And when Jensen, who's currently the CEO and has been since the beginning, told his mom that he wanted to start a microchip company, his mom told him to go get a job. She was not so supportive. But they had this plan. They dreamed it up. They put it together. They soon moved the offices from the Denny's to Priam's townhouse that didn't even have AC. And for the last 30 years, they've been working quietly behind the scenes. They're powerhouses in Silicon Valley, but the chances are that you've never heard of these guys is probably pretty high because they've been flying under the radar, just building the company for 30 years until recently they were in the news because the stock jumped 35%. They have been a big company in Silicon Valley, like I said, for a long time. I was a tech consultant in Silicon Valley about 20 years ago. Nvidia was a client of mine. So was Intel. So was AMD. So was Sun Microsystems, who the other two founders worked for when they founded the company. So they've been around a long time, but they haven't been a household name until something can't happen. One, their stock price shot up 35%, but what made the stock shoot up 35%? Of course, it was the emergence of ChatGPT and AI. It's worth $1 billion. So is it worth $1 billion? We're going to talk about that in comparison to Intel. Intel is worth $125 billion. Intel has been around longer than Nvidia has. Intel makes more money than Nvidia does, but why is it worth in the market 8 times more? Let's break down some numbers. Intel's revenues are $56 billion versus Nvidia's revenues of $25.8 billion. Intel's EBITDA, or their cash flow, is also higher. It's almost $10 billion, whereas Nvidia's cash flow is $6 billion. So why is Nvidia worth 8 times more? Well, let's break down some numbers and try to explain that. But before we do, well, let's break down numbers. Then we'll go through the AI component to it. So the return on equity for Nvidia is almost 19%, 18.85%. For Intel, it's negative 2.81%. So they are earning, Nvidia is earning more money on their dollars than Intel is. Quarterly earnings growth for Nvidia last quarter was 26%. Well, Intel actually had no growth. They shrank a little bit. And lastly, the profit margin at Nvidia is 18.5%. And Intel's profit margin is -5, just a little over -5. So while Nvidia doesn't make as much money as Intel, it's a growing company, has better margins, and currently has a lot more press thanks to the sales of their GPUs for AI processing, which Intel also makes. But Intel is shrinking and not making as much money from their operations, and is therefore valued less. So even though the company Intel makes more money, they don't do as well. They don't make as much profit margin on each of their units, which is one of the big reasons why Intel is only valued at 125 billion and Nvidia is valued at 1 trillion. And of course, it doesn't hurt that Nvidia has been in the press a lot, largely due to the AI component. Nvidia's main product that differs from the other chip makers. Nvidia focuses solely on GPUs, graphic processing units, or graphic cards, and they are considered, compared to all others, they're considered to be better. They run cooler, they have more compatibility, and they have better support, which is one of the reasons why the company makes more money. Nvidia's cards are the cards that companies want. In a recent interview, Sam Altman, who is one of the founders of OpenAI, which makes ChatGPT, which is a whole other story, he said that their priority for ChatGPT is ChatGPT-4, which they have now, that they continue to train and make things better. But the GPUs are their biggest bottleneck. They can't get enough GPUs, and which means they can't get enough. Nvidia can't make enough GPUs. Every time they make GPUs, they're flying off the shelves. They can't make enough. They can't keep up with demand. And if OpenAI or ChatGPT-4 can't get enough GPUs, that means that they can't roll out new features. Like they can't take it from 30K context window to beyond 100K, which means more processing power. So if they could get to 100K processing context windows, then that means that you could have longer chats with ChatGPT. It could have more context. It would remember more of your previous chats. You could have a continual stream of chats going instead of kind of the choppy versions that it has now. They have to limit the availability for private models for enterprises. This means that companies who don't want to share their data with the world by putting it into the general ChatGPT pool, they want to keep it proprietary, which is why a lot of companies you've seen in the news have actually banned their employees from using ChatGPT, because if they're doing queries, if they're putting in data, they're saying, here, I'm going to upload the spreadsheet, analyze the spreadsheet. All of that goes into the memory of ChatGPT and could be queried from people not at the company, because it's saved in the database. It becomes part of the common data. So what they are working on, and other companies are doing this as well, they're making private models for companies where they can say, we're going to silo this off. You're not connected to the rest of the internet. Other people don't have your data. They can't get access to it. And we're going to charge you more for this kind of private, custom-built, white-labeled ChatGPT just for your company. But they have to limit that because they don't have enough GPUs. They also have to limit capacity for fine-tuning the API, which means you can customize it with your own data, kind of like the enterprise version, but customize it for you. They can't do a lot of that because they don't have the GPUs. And lastly, if you've used ChatGPT, you know that it can't do anything with images. If you say, give me an image of the NBA basketball Bulls, or make this image and give it a description, it can't do any kind of images. It can't retrieve images. It can't alter images. And when it was launched, they teased that was going to be coming soon. But now, because of the GPU shortage, they are not going to release that until next year, until sometime in 2024. So what does this mean for the stock of Nvidia? If companies like ChatGPT which are one of the stories of this year, they're the thing that kicked off AI or kicked up the growth of AI and made it a story that is in all of the news. In fact, the growth of AI so far this year accounts for all of the gains of the stock market. If it wasn't for AI stocks that are providing the components for AI, like Nvidia, then the stock market would be down a couple of percent. But because of the growth of these companies, because it is doing so well, then it's taking the whole stock market up with it. And Nvidia just alone is responsible for 9.5% of the growth in the stock market just this year. But it could be doing better if it could make more units. So this bottleneck is Nvidia providing more units. So if the bottleneck of the growth of this super hot sector, the AI companies growing, is all going back to the chip makers like Nvidia, then what does that mean for the stock of Nvidia, the value of Nvidia? This is the main reason why the stock is worth nearly $1 trillion and why it shot up 35%, why their competitor Marvel also went up 35%, because they have similar products. They make GPUs as well. The stock shot up last week because Nvidia came out and said, oh, we actually exceeded all of our earnings expectations. We did better than we thought we were going to be doing. We made more money, and the demand is so great that we can't keep up. Now, I'm not recommending the stock. I'm not saying that you should buy it. I'm just kind of trying to give some context to why Nvidia seemingly came out of nowhere and now is the sixth most valuable company in the world at $1 trillion. It's now part of the. We've heard about the FANG, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and now Nvidia is one of those. It's a company that we're going to be hearing a lot more about, especially as the AI market continues to grow, because this is just the beginning. There are a couple of analysts that have said that this is just the beginning. I wrote about that in yesterday's newsletter, that the AI space is not overvalued. It's not a bubble. I forget the guy's name that said that. Also, Kathy Wood said the same thing. She is a prominent investor that invests in tech. Some people like her, some people don't. But analysts are saying that the AI space is just getting started, that companies like this that provide the components are the ones that are going to reap the benefit the most. When I worked in Silicon Valley in the late 90s, one of the companies that did really well during the last tech boom, last web.com boom, was Cisco. They made the components that ran the internet, and the consumer internet became popular in the mid-90s. It's been around since the 60s, but the consumer internet, meaning you and I, are starting to use it, not just governments and research institutions and universities. The consumer internet came out in the mid-90s, about 90, 94, 95. And Cisco made all the routers and the modems and all the things that people use to run the internet and run things at the switch level and at the data center level. They made those, and Cisco was the hot stock of the mid-90s. Nvidia may be the Cisco of this tech boom, this AI boom, because they're the ones that are, by and large, making all of the tech for the AI companies now that are doing so well and that are taking off. So that's my take on Nvidia and the AI story. I think AI has been super interesting this year. It will continue to be interesting as companies continue to train on these models. And it reminds me of the gold rush, the 1849 gold rush in California, where everybody was running out to California in the United States to mine for gold. The people that made the money weren't the miners. They were the people that made the equipment for the miners. They were the ones that ran the hotels, that ran the restaurants. Levi Strauss came out of the gold rush. Some Levi Strauss and some other people made the jeans. They invented jeans practically to sell to the miners because they were rugged, they were durable. And now Levi's has become a global brand because of that. The companies that sold the components, like Cisco in the late 90s. And Nvidia is currently the one that is selling the components. They're the ones selling the picks and shovels to the AI companies for this AI revolution. So what do you think about Nvidia and about the AI revolution? If you have any comments, leave it down below the video. If this was helpful, if this was interesting, let me know as well. I would love to dig into more companies, maybe on a more granular level. And I can share my screen and go through some of the earnings per share, go through the financials, go through an analysis, go through what it's trading at, and how we might want to invest or not invest. If that's interesting, I haven't done that before, but my background is finance. I have an undergrad in finance. I worked on Wall Street. I've got an MBA, so I know how to do this stuff. If you want to see more of that and want me to take a look at specific companies, then comment down below this video. And I'll be doing more of this, focusing and highlighting specific companies and talking about the market in general in the morning download. So if you want to get that for free in your inbox, then go to morningdownload.com or go to the link below this video. So thanks for watching my rant about Nvidia, and I look forward to talking to you more down in the comments. And also, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't, so I can keep making these and we can analyze some stocks together. Thanks.